All right, welcome back to BSE 308, which is Career Management for Engineers, and I have with me today Scott Walker. Scott is a person who has been part of this class now. I think this will be the third time you've presented. This is the first time on video like this, and he is a local realtor.
That's right.
And does a lot of work with housing and has done a great job with our class. So, Scott, I'm going to just kick it over to you and let you introduce yourself and kind of work our way through the slides.
All right. Thanks, John. As John said, my name is Scott Walker. Walker Real Estate. I have my own brokerage here in town, and I've been working in real estate for 21 years now. So I'm here to talk to you about plans that you may not be thinking about just yet, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's never too early to start thinking about it. As you'll, I guess you'll soon discover, time does fly, and you all appreciate the importance of planning when it comes to career, and you're in the middle of that right now, and you might be thinking that decisions about whether or not to buy a home are way down the road, but the decisions that you make right now, they're going to have long-term consequences or benefits. So now is the time to start thinking about that.
So, like in the past presentations we've done online here, I've had a few questions that we're going to kind of bury in here. You talked about planning and the importance of developing a plan, and that's really kind of a big theme of this class. In fact, at the end of the semester, the students have to turn in a pretty comprehensive long-term professional career plan and look at places like, or things like where they're going to live in the future, the type of job they'd like to have, how they're going to think about healthcare and those sorts of things. Why do you think it is that we don't oftentimes take the time to sit down and develop a plan?
Well, I think a lot of people find it to be overwhelming. The bigger the decision, the more overwhelming it is, and the easier it is to put it off. And right now, as I said, people are focused on their career, thinking that's job one, priority one. And something like purchasing a home, that's something that I might not have to do for years down the road. But what I'd like to stress is the importance of making those plans and figuring things out now so that it doesn't even further delay the decisions that they'd like to make.
Mm-hmm.
They want to put themselves in a position where they can get the house when they want it.
So as we look at this whole notion of planning, I think another thing that happens is people are a little bit insecure. They don't want to put a plan down on paper because they say, well, things are never going to go exactly as I plan them out.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been, I mean, for me, if I had planned my life to be exactly where I'm at today at age 50, 58, it would have looked a lot different at age 20,
right?
Which is a lot of what our students are 20, 21, 22.
Right.
But life happens, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about today, they're not irrevocable. It's something that you can easily change as you go along. The important thing is to get certain principles laid out, to start putting down some basic foundations that you can build off of. And then if you decide to go in a different direction, well, then so be it.
I tell our students it's just like taking a trip. You want to know basically where you're going generally, and you might map out a route and you might take some little side ventures, some of them totally unexpected. That's where some of the fun stuff happens. But without that original set of goals and a plan, you're just aimless.
Right. So I guess the first question that people need to consider is whether or not to own in the first place. I'm in real estate, and obviously I have a vested interest in getting people to buy, but I'm not here to try and persuade people that it's for them. Owning a home isn't for everyone. And so if I could live in that Parisian chateau style apartment, I might choose that over a house myself. But there are a lot of considerations that people might look at in deciding whether or not to buy. The first one is when you're trying to buy a house, you have to save up for it. Generally speaking, you're going to want a healthy down payment. And that's one of the first impediments to actually making that move to buy a house. You'll need the money for the down payment and for the closing costs. Whereas if you're renting, you don't need any more than the security deposit up front. When you're looking at owning a home, you've got monthly payments which are going to exceed what you would normally pay in rent because it includes the mortgage payment, property tax, interest on the mortgage, insurance, which is usually a decent amount higher than renter's insurance, and utilities. If you're paying for utilities in a rental, it typically means the rent would be a little bit lower.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you're completely responsible for maintenance and repairs. Whereas with most rental situations, the landlord is responsible for all of the maintenance and repairs. One of the big benefits that I see with owning is that it's forced savings. That extra money that you're putting into the home that ends up forming equity, the amount that exceeds what you owe on the house. So if you own a home that's worth $200,000 and you owe $150,000, you have $50,000 of equity. So that money that you're saving in the home, it's of value to you that you can use down the road. Whereas when you rent, you could use that money for something else. You could take trips, you can buy things. With owning a home, you have the potential for appreciation. Now, that's not a guarantee because depending upon when you sell and where that home might be located, appreciation may be more of a speculative thing. But generally speaking, if you own a home for at least 7 years, and further, you'd likely be able to sell it and get some appreciation out of it. You have a similar opportunity in the rental scenario. If you have money that you're setting aside in investments, whether it's stocks, CDs, or even your own business, you have the potential to grow that money. Now, the big question there is, do you have the discipline to do that? I think that's one of the trickiest things. People have to have the discipline when they own a home because you have to make your mortgage payments. But when it comes to renting, it's a whole different type of discipline. The final question about tax deductions, that's largely gone away. With the recent tax law changes in 2018, when it went into effect, the standard deduction was doubled, which means that the vast majority of taxpayers will want to take the standard deduction. That's important because the only way you get the benefit of the tax deduction for owning a home, that would be deducting the mortgage interest and the property tax, is if your itemized deductions are higher than the standard deduction. And most people find that that isn't the case anymore.
Right. I think it's really important to note because if these students are going out and they're looking at websites, they're thinking about maybe buying a house.
Yeah.
I think that difference on the tax deduction and also the interest deduction and also the property tax deduction is really important.
It is.
I know for my wife and I, it was awesome to be able to write all of that off. And,
Yes.
And while we have a higher standard now, we no longer have that sort of luxury. I mean, we would be just as well off on the tax side if we were renting.
That's right. That's right. So, a key question, which in many cases even trumps some of the financial questions, is lifestyle. Because obviously there's a big difference between living in a standalone home, living in a condo, and living in an apartment. So these are the types of questions that people are going to want to look at when they're trying to make that decision and plan for the future. Location in a neighborhood. If you want to be in a neighborhood, for the most part, you need to own a home. An urban setting is what you're likely to get with most rentals. Although, obviously, it's possible to rent a home too. In fact, in the recent 2 to 3 years, the number of single-family homes that have been rented out has gone up considerably. And it's partly because of the increase in the prices of homes that we're finding that a lot of people are having trouble affording some of those homes. The type of situation that you're in, obviously, having a yard with the possibility of a garden, flower garden.
Having a dog.
Having that white picket fence.
A big dog. You can still have a dog in an apartment.
Well, and another thing to consider, a lot of places recognize that people want dogs. So I'm finding that not only in condos, but in apartments as well, there are more dogs that are being allowed, or more places are allowing dogs. And if you intend to start a family, that's of course going to be another thing. Will the apartment setting be conducive to raising a child? And is that urban setting ideal for raising a child? Those are questions that the individual needs to
If I
look
could
at.
just interrupt you for 1 second. So, one of the things when I was, again, 21 or 22 or 23, I would have never ever thought, first of all, I never thought about having kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I met my wife, that was an assumption, but I hadn't even thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
Schools is like the school considerations
It
for a
is.
future family is a really big deal.
It is, and I find that if in some of the most popular school districts, you will need to plan for that as well. You want to make sure that you own a home in that neighborhood in order to be guaranteed to get your child into that school district. So,
And if you're in a good school district,
yeah,
there's actually a little bit of a premium on the cost of homes in that
correct.
area.
Yeah, that's often the case. So, you'll have to plan in order to save up to afford it. Maintenance and repairs, that's not only the cost of it, but the fact that you're going to have to do a lot of things, whether it's cutting the grass, shoveling, raking the leaves, cleaning out the gutters. There are a lot of things that are involved with maintaining a home. Even just arranging for contractors that come out and do work when something goes wrong. It's all whether or not you're interested in taking care of those things. Another thing that I find is that people that want the freedom to travel a lot, they would prefer the flexibility of renting as opposed to owning a home, because if you leave an apartment within a complex, it's safer usually than leaving a home, because you do need to make certain precautions before leaving the house vacant for a month, for example. Proximity to others is going to be a factor. Having the shared walls or hallways, the noises, the cooking smells, all sorts of questions like that, as well as space. I find that it's a very popular need for people to have storage space, and that's at a premium in apartments and condos usually. But in a home, you've got a whole basement to fill, at least if you're in the Midwest.
I have a son who is relatively newly married, and they decided they wanted to save a ton of money to buy a house. So they got a 1 bedroom. They don't have a lot of, I'm guessing they may have a couple hundred square feet, maybe 300 square feet. And the noise and the odors thing is a big deal.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you're married, if you're both off at school or one's working and one's at school, it's easy to, it's nice to have the space. It's nice to be able to be apart a little bit from time to time.
So as I mentioned earlier, it's never too early to start planning, because it's hard to anticipate all the things that you need, and sometimes it's easy to underestimate how long it'll take to do certain things. So it never hurts to talk to people and get the information up front so that you can be ready.
So a question, and again, we talked a little bit earlier about planning. Where do you start? What are some of the general resources? We talked a little bit about why you think people don't get started, but what are some of those very early resources to help people starting to think about a plan?
Well, I think for me, one of the first people to talk to is a realtor, because a realtor is going to be able to answer a lot of the foundational questions about zeroing in on the neighborhoods that you would want to consider, the types of homes that you would consider to be acceptable or desirable. That's going to help narrow things down right there, and you can start coming up with a range of possible prices and targets that you need to aim for, as well as helping you consider other things like the school district, what amenities are nearby, and how likely it is that something is going to be available for you when you're ready. Then, once you have a price range in mind, it's good to go and talk to a lender, because they're going to start talking to you about some of the specifics about your financial situation and what specific things you need to do to plan.
So where does a person start in terms of finding a realtor?
Well, I like to say, it's good to talk to people that have actually been out.
So more of the word of mouth?
Word of mouth is a good thing. I personally think reviews are a good way as well. So even Google reviews to find out what experiences people have had.
So let me put you on the spot. When we bought here I live in Cross Plains, And when we bought in Cross Plains, we actually rode around for a couple days, I think with two different realtors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we didn't like them, but we just didn't quite click. That's okay, right? To make sure you feel that you find somebody you trust
Mm-hmm.
and can communicate well with.
Yeah, I think that's you've hit two really important points there. And it's something that I stress to people all the time when I'm talking to somebody about whether or not they'd like to work with me as a realtor.
Mhm.
I stress the importance of trust because if you can't trust the person you're working with, you don't really get the benefit of their experience or their knowledge. You want to be able to take what they're saying and run with it. So if you don't feel that you can trust them, it's probably not a good fit. And the other, as you said, communication, especially in a market like we have right now when things are moving quickly, you want somebody not only who communicates effectively, but who's available to
Mhm.
communicate quickly. So when you need them, you want them to be
Mhm.
available.
And for us, it was a matter of finding somebody who sort of understood our needs, that was kind of in the same stage of life. At that time, we had young kids,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was a part of it as well.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, that all makes sense. One of the first things that a lender can help talk through with you in more specificity is establishing a healthy credit score. This is one of those things that you can't do overnight.
Mhm.
So unless you've actually started borrowing money already, students may not have any credit score whatsoever. So it's good, oddly enough, to start a revolving line of credit. You don't need to maintain a balance. If you pay it off in full every month, that's fine. You're still establishing credit. It's going to be really important to pay your bills on time, pay your rent on time, and don't apply for too much credit. It's fine to have a card or two or maybe three, but as you start adding, it starts to affect your credit score negatively because the lender realizes that even though you don't have a balance on all of your cards, you have the potential to go out in one day and charge them all up.
you're a potential risk for them.
Yes. And so you could get yourself in trouble with the debt to income ratio, which is another thing that they're going to look at. Fine, you may have a really healthy income, but if your debt exceeds a certain percentage of that, then they realize, well, you can't afford as much because you already have debt to service. Now, the chart that you see there for credit scores and whether or not you're, appealing to a lender is not carved in granite. You'll find a variety of ranges out there. This gives you a rough idea. Again, it's going to be important to talk to your lender about what targets to shoot for and what kind of interest rates it's going to qualify you for and what kind of mortgages.
Mm-hmm. So just a question, Scott, with the debt to income ratio, this is something any student could sit down and calculate, right?
That's right.
And you would look at whatever your income is.
Yep.
And you would also, would that be your take home pay, or would that be your before you take out all your deductions?
It should be your gross pay.
Your gross pay,
Yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's the pay before you take out all those deductions.
Right.
And a simple calculation to look at what that ratio is
That's right.
something anybody can do.
Yep.
And it looks like if you're above 30 to 36%, you might want to start, even as a student, try
Yes.
to whittle that down.
That's right.
As an early goal.
Yep. Saving for a down payment is obviously one of the things the lender is going to talk to you about. As we mentioned before, once you have an idea of what kind of price range you're looking at, then you can calculate what that percentage is going to be. So if you're looking at a $200,000 home, well, actually, that's not realistic. In our market, for example, it's hard to find anything under $300,000. So let's say $300,000, 20% is $60,000. So it's going to take a while for most people to save up $60,000. So it's important to be able to start your planning early with that, especially. And one of the reasons that percentage that you're putting down is so important is that it affects the interest rate that you're going to get. It also will affect what kind of program you might be eligible for. And one last thing is that as you're paying less down, you'll have to pay mortgage insurance.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically protecting the lender against you going into foreclosure with your loan. So you're paying for insurance to protect someone else.
Right.
And so that's in addition to your monthly mortgage payment, you'll be paying for that insurance policy. So it's always nice to avoid that.
So you mentioned, just as an example, you said 300,000, and if you have to come up with 20%, that's 60,000, which is a lot. That's really scary for a lot of our students.
Right.
Their first job, they might be making between 40, maybe 60, 65,000. So it still seems like a ton of money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's kind of Dane County, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
it true that in other parts of maybe the Midwest or even other parts of Wisconsin, homes could be higher priced than that, but they could also be considerably lower priced
It
depending on
is.
where you
It's
locate?
true. The median price is right around 280,000 right now, which means there are half the homes cheaper and
Is
half the
that
homes more.
Dane County or is that all of
That's Dane
Wisconsin?
County.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yes, it's true. And I've had several clients this year alone who want something under 250,000. So it is, those homes are out there. Um,
Some of our students that might be moving to a rural area of Wisconsin or Minnesota or
Certainly.
Iowa, it
Yep.
might be 200,000. So
Yep.
it's really important that
Yep.
if you're evaluating,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these students will be getting job offers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you're evaluating a job offer, paying 300,000 for a nice home versus 180, which might be some parts of the Midwest, it's really important
Yeah.
to look at that because it affects your take-home pay.
Sure. And I had a client recently who bought a house near Partyville, so that's a little bit
Mhm.
north of us by about 45, 50 minutes. 180,000 for a nice size ranch home plus 7 acres.
Wow.
So yeah, very different
Yeah.
than the Madison market.
Just really crucial that students take a look at all of that before you accept a job offer.
That's right. And again, that's where a realtor can help out with that analysis. Any realtor in Wisconsin can look at data all over the state.
Mhm.
So they can help you make those determinations. Ultimately, if they think they're going to be getting a job in another area, it'd be good to get a local realtor.
One other question. When my wife and I first bought a home, this was back in 1990, so
Okay.
almost 30 years ago, maybe 91, um, we were able to put down 5%. I think part of that was we both had full-time stable jobs, relatively good earning potential. How do you get a 5% down mortgage? Is that even possible in
Oh,
this
it
day and
is.
age?
It is. It's certainly possible. And so most lenders are going to have that option for you. But again, it'll affect what interest rate that you might have available to you. And you'll have the mortgage
And the mortgage
insurance.
insurance, sure.
And depending upon what other factors might be in place, like if you're a veteran, you would qualify for a VA loan. You might get an interest rate as low as 3.5.
Mhm.
And there are actually some 0% loans available with rural housing and USDA loans. So
I just don't want people to get too freaked out about the 20%,
right,
that there are some
right.
options.
That's right. And that, again, is why it's so important to meet with a lender early on to find out what programs are there, which programs they think would be relevant to that person, and what's probably going to be around in 5 years when they might be ready to buy. You know, obviously, realtors are going to be helping to scout areas, getting to know your market. That's how you set those goals. We already hit on some of these, points earlier. Finding somebody who has the information on that market and who's willing to do the research to find out all of those different things that you're going to want to know about, like the neighborhoods, the schools, the accommodations, as well as analyzing specific properties. When you get to the point of actually being interested in a property, you want somebody who's not just going to try to get you to buy that property, but help you understand whether or not it's worth what you're paying for it. Now we've been talking basically the difference between purchasing a home and renting an apartment, but there are other options for investing in real estate, and it's not always just for down the road either. It is possible to start with one of these different options as your very first purchase. Obviously, single family homes and condos are probably the most straightforward for people, but considering something like a duplex or a fourplex or some other type of rental, that's a viable option for new owners because if the property is affordable to them, then they could rent out the units
Okay.
and make money to help supplement their income to help defray the cost of the mortgage. Um, the fixer upper is not going to be for everyone. Obviously, people know whether or not they're up for remodeling work. When people watch shows on HGTV, it's easy to get an idealized
Uh-huh.
view of what it means to fix up a house.
It looks pretty glamorous on
Yes.
TV.
They also, I think, are a little bit misleading about the cost of remodeling because I
Mhm.
believe they don't include labor costs in
Yeah.
their the numbers that they share on screen. So it's important to make sure that you can do as much of the work as you can, and when you are bringing in professionals, to get good prices.
It's also really important if you're doing remodeling or fix-up work, if you're married or you're in some type of a partnership, that you have both people on board,
Yes,
because there's so much conflict. I think there's
right.
even movies about that, the
That's right.
conflict that happens.
That's right. Yeah, the money pit
The money pit is the
situation.
one I was thinking about.
Yeah. And I've seen examples both ways where
Mhm.
people got in over their heads and they ended up not being happy with their purchase. And then recently I had a client who they purchased a home as a fixer-upper and it needed a lot of work. And the wife came here for a graduate program and the husband came here as a contractor. And so he did all of the work himself, did just an amazing job of fixing it up. They had a change in their circumstances, so they needed to move away in 1 year.
Oh.
Normally, you don't make money selling a house after buying it 1 year later.
Yeah.
They made a $60,000 profit on it.
Wow.
Profit. So they
Must have
that
been in a
was-
good area, and they must have done
it
a
was
good
a
job with it.
it was an up and coming area, so it was a
Yeah.
unique place where they could still get a good price on a house, and then people are willing to pay more once it's all fixed up. So since the neighborhood is up and coming, it's becoming more
So
gentrified.
let me just, because we have a lot of students who are who are handy. They're engineers.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of people who really like hands-on kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
I also know of a person in, I think I can talk about this, in New Glarus. She bought a fixer-upper. Actually, before she bought it, she had an inspection done, and she found that there were all kinds of wiring issues and code issues.
Mm-hmm.
There may or may not have been asbestos, but I think the big thing was their electrical system. Just talk about that a little bit. If you are going to buy an older home, you maybe
Mhm.
want to save a little bit of money. Who do you go to for that kind of advice? I'm assuming an inspector
Yes.
of some sort.
It's pretty well expected that if you put in an offer on a property, it should be contingent on residential home inspection, and the inspector will give you as much detail about all of those different systems in the house: the HVAC, the electrical, the plumbing, the basic structure of the house. They'll look into every nook and cranny that they can. They can't see into the walls, but
Right.
they'll look into the attic and give you an idea of every kind of defect that they're able to identify.
So do your homework.
Yes,
And make sure you have people you trust.
Yes, and it's also important to do the follow-up inspections. It's becoming more routine where the home inspector will identify something, but they'll say, I know this is not right, but I can't give you much detail on it. I recommend a follow-up inspection with
Sure.
a specialist in this trade. And you have that person come out and give you a more accurate estimate. That way you can modify the deal with the seller if necessary in order to make sure that you're still getting the right price, or maybe have something fixed prior to moving in.
Good.
I have, and then I have clients that I have an engineer who recently he was about ready to sell a home that I helped him buy earlier, but he said he wanted a place out in the country, so we found a place that was a fixer-upper, but he was perfectly comfortable with it. He was going to do most of the work himself. He said, with the family members helping, and he's an electrical engineer, so he was going to do all of the electrical.
Yeah. Nailed that.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh-huh.
So he got a really good price on a place, and I had confidence that he was able to do the work.
Yeah.
Not only did he, have the inspection, but I could tell as we were just going through the house the first time, he was inspecting it himself. So he had a real good idea what was going on with
I
that
had one
house.
other question about that last slide we were looking at. The term condo, it's always confused me. What designates a condo versus a townhome versus an apartment? I'm just curious.
An apartment is something that you don't own,
Okay.
and so that could take a variety of forms. It could be a large building, or it could be an upper flat.
Okay.
With a condominium, it's a form of ownership. And it's in Wisconsin. Now, it's not true for every state, but in Wisconsin, there's an actual statute that governs condominiums.
Okay.
So there needs to be a condominium declaration.
Okay.
So you can take, for example, what looks like a duplex home and condoize it, or even just a single family home, and you can, have an attorney draw up a condo declaration. You can make it a condo, and you could have 4 houses in a row on a block, condoize them, and you could, have a little association where,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So one of the general principles with condos that people find to be advantageous is that generally the association arranges for the common areas to be managed and maintained. So you're paying a condo fee every month, but it gets you lawn service, it gets you snow shoveling, it gets you siding and roofing, all of those things. So the idea is to set aside enough money to cover all of the routine maintenance and to save up for any capital expenditures, like things that need to be repaired or replaced. Condos can come in the form of, single family homes or big buildings. It doesn't matter. It's that it's a form of ownership.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when people are in a relationship, whether it's a marriage or life partner, what advice can you give them on? We talked a little bit about where to live and some of the considerations. Any advice on, again, 2 people, you've got to kind of meet in the middle in many cases, on like how to live and how to determine your spending priorities, those kinds of things. I know this is more on the more personal relationship side of things, but just, I know you've seen a lot and you've probably ridden around in your car with a lot of couples. Any advice or words of wisdom you have on that?
I guess perhaps, it's obviously a sticky area. I can't tell people how to live, but I guess the biggest advice I would have is to be intentional about it. And that goes back to the planning process, not to just bumble along and assume things are going to work out, but if you're in a relationship with somebody, to sit down and talk about these goals that you have, to make sure that you're on the same page and know, what it is that you're aiming for and how you're going to get it. Sometimes that planning will help you figure out, what is acceptable and what isn't. But obviously the spending priorities are really going to be tied into those goals that you're trying to hit.
It's really important. Again, not all of our students are going to get married or be in some type of a lifelong partnership, but it's really good if you can have those conversations up front.
Right.
Like you don't need to have your whole life planned out, but those kinds of big picture priorities can make a big difference in people's success in a relationship longer term.
Well, one thing that I think may be up and coming, seeing a little bit of it already, is unrelated parties deciding to rent. So they'll find a house and somebody buys it, and then they'll rent out rooms to friends. And I think an obvious next step is for 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 friends getting together on the same mortgage.
Yeah.
So they're each paying a mortgage payment towards this home to allow them to leverage a much bigger investment than they would individually. And that would require a lot of planning.
A lot of planning.
Roommate agreements in addition to a mortgage.
And in some cases, and maybe in all cases,
Sure.
getting the help of you don't need to spend thousands and thousands, but some attorneys, some legal help. And
definitely.
Maybe an accountant who can help that attorney look over things, and maybe a realtor as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, now, is that our last slide?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. I actually added a couple of final questions here for you.
Okay.
Do you have any success stories
unfortunately, no.
No? Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
of young people who kind of started at this stage and now they're living their life's dream because of the planning that they did?
Well, there are a couple that came to mind right away. One was a young man who was entering law school. He had enough money for a modest down payment, so we found him a pretty small house, but in nice shape, and it was very close to campus. So he lived there while he was attending law school, and when he graduated, he kept the place and rented it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so he left the state to pursue employment elsewhere, but he kept this, and so he had a stream of income from a rental property.
Mm-hmm.
Another client, a similar thing. It was postgraduate work, but it was, he got into medical school and it was going to be a postdoc that totaled 7 years. He bought a property with the help of down payment money from his parents. And he purchased, his timing wasn't the greatest. None of us knew it at the time, but he bought just about a half a year before the crash. And so, he bought kind of at the top of the market. The good thing is we bargained on the price. We got the best price we could. And he took my advice about which neighborhood to consider as far as the strength of resales, the popularity. It's about as recession-proof a neighborhood as we could find.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, that held, it held pretty well. And he did two very important things to improve his situation. He had maintained it very well, and he worked hard to update and upgrade the place where he could,
Mm-hmm.
doing some remodeling himself and having other improvements done by contractors, but doing it on a budget so that at the end of his program, when he sold it for a really good price and quickly. He had enough money to pay off his parents and walk away with some cash in his property.
Oh, good for him.
Yes, so that worked out extremely well.
Just to tie together a couple things with our other speaker who talked about financial management. The one thing that happened to me when I first met my wife, I was just starting in graduate school, and I went to visit her at her home. She lived about an hour and a half north of where I was at in West Lafayette, Indiana. And I went home to her place and I got sick, and she was away at work. And I remember laying in a bed watching a show, and they were talking about mutual funds, investing in mutual funds, and in particular the stock market side of mutual funds. And it's like, doggone it, I'm going to do that. I didn't have a lot of money. I probably had $400 or $500 that I'd saved and scrimped away. And over time, I was kind of cashing and putting $50 a month or whatever per pay period. And when we got married, and then 4 or 5 years later, we're in Champlin, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. And I look at my mutual fund account, and it matched exactly what that first down payment would be. Nice. And it was all from just little bits and pieces of savings. So yeah, it adds up, and you do have to be thoughtful and planful about things. Yeah, the time value of money. It is something that it's hard to overstate just how important it is to start early. The earlier you start, the better, because it grows. It grows a lot. My other question here that I did add to you, or for you, I don't know if you've actually seen this, but if money today was not an issue and you could be doing it, this is more of a human interest thing. You could be doing anything in the world right now besides being here taping this with me. Mm-hmm. What would you want to be doing? I think travel. I think that is the favorite thing to do. When I have the time and the money to get out and travel, I love seeing the world. So that's something that I intend to do more of. It's I'm at that point in life where I'm still helping the kids out with school. Mm-hmm. They're both in higher education right now, so I don't have the money. That's been another theme of both of these presentations on the sort of financial side of things. Is you need to be frugal, you need to save, you need to think about the time value of money and the rule of 72s and compound interest and being smart. But don't be so smart that you don't get those experiences in your life, whether it's travel or time with family and loved ones, hobbies and those kinds of things. It takes money to do that, right? That's right. But don't be so frugal that you don't take the time to enjoy life. That's right. It's all part of setting your priorities. So, Scott, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I'm assuming that if students do have questions, I can kind of get back to you, and we'll try to get a couple of those answered possibly. Sure. And look forward to being able to show this in class and maybe use it for the next couple of years to come. So thank you for being here. Oh, you're very welcome.